On a rock above the sea, on the coast of Sicily, an enormous man is singing a love song. He is huge and he is alone and he is not good at this. He sings to a girl who lives out in the water, a sea-nymph, and he tells her that he knows he is ugly, that he has one great eye and a rough voice and a body that frightens people, but that he has cheese and lambs and a cool cave, and that if she would only come up out of the waves, he would learn to be gentle. She does not come. She never comes. And he sits on his rock and sings anyway, day after day, because a Greek poet once wrote that the only cure for a broken heart is a song, and this giant has nothing else. You know this giant, or you think you do. His name is Polyphemus, and he is the most famous monster in the Odyssey, the man-eating Cyclops, the one-eyed brute who traps Odysseus in a cave and gets a burning stake driven through his eye for it. That is the Polyphemus everyone remembers, a savage, a horror, an obstacle for a clever hero to outwit and escape. But the lovesick giant on the rock is the same creature. The Greeks and the Romans told both stories about him, the monster and the heartbroken singer. And if you only know the first one, you are missing something the ancient world thought was worth writing down. Because when you go back and actually read the famous scene, the one everyone thinks they know, a strange thing happens. It stops being obvious who the monster is. The hero breaks into a stranger's home. He robs it. He waits, against his crew's advice, for the owner to come back because he wants a gift. And by the end, the question the poem quietly leaves you with is not how the clever man escaped the beast. It is whether the beast was the one who was wronged. Here is the version everyone carries, and it is genuinely thrilling, so let it be thrilling first. Odysseus and his men, sailing home from Troy, land on an island and find a huge cave, well stocked, clearly someone's home. They go inside, and while they are there, the owner comes back, Polyphemus, a Cyclops, a one-eyed giant the size of a mountain crag herding his sheep. He rolls a boulder across the mouth of the cave, a stone so vast that no team of horses could move it, sealing them in. And then he sees the strangers, and instead of welcoming them, he seizes two of Odysseus's men, dashes their brains out against the floor and eats them raw. He does it again the next morning. The crew is trapped with a cannibal, and they cannot even kill him in his sleep, because only he can move the stone. So Odysseus thinks his way out, and this is the part that made him a legend. He offers the Cyclops a skin of unmixed wine, strong enough to fell a god, and the giant drinks it and asks the stranger's name. And Odysseus says, "My name is Nobody. Call me Nobody." Then when the Cyclops is dead drunk, they take a great stake of olive wood, sharpened and hardened in the fire, and drive it into his single eye and put it out. Polyphemus roars in agony, and the other Cyclopes on the island call from outside, "What is wrong? Who is hurting you?" And he screams back, "Nobody is hurting me. Nobody." And they shrug and go away because he has just told them no one is there. And in the morning, when the blinded giant rolls back the stone to let his sheep out to pasture, feeling the back of each animal to make sure no man is riding it, Odysseus and his men are underneath, clinging to the wool of the sheep's bellies, carried out past the giant's groping hands. It is one of the great escapes in all of literature. Clever, ruthless, perfect. And it is only half the scene, because the poem does not begin with the monster. It begins with the break-in. Go back to how Odysseus and his men got into that cave in the first place, because Hohmer is very specific, and it is not the way you remember it. Polyphemus is not home. He is out with his flocks. And Odysseus, finding the cave empty, does not knock, does not wait, does not leave a sign. He walks in with a picked band of his men, and they help themselves. They light a fire. They take the cheeses drying on the racks. They eat the giant's food in the giant's house while the giant is away. And here is the detail that changes everything. The crew begs him to grab what they can and run, to drive off some lambs and get back to the ship before the owner returns. And Odysseus refuses. He wants to stay. He wants to see the Cyclops, and he says this himself. He is hoping the giant will give him a guest gift. To understand why that matters, you have to understand xenia. Xenia was the sacred law of hospitality, and to the Greeks it was close to the most important rule there was. A host was bound to feed and shelter a stranger, and a guest was bound not to abuse that welcome, and the whole arrangement was under the personal protection of Zeus himself, in his role as Zeus Zeneos, Zeus, god of guests. It is the moral backbone of the entire Odyssey. Almost everyone Odysseus meets is a test of it. So look at what has actually happened when Polyphemus comes home. A band of armed strangers has entered his house uninvited, lit a fire, and started eating his stores. And their leader is lingering specifically because he expects to be given presents on top of it. Polyphemus, for his part, is a creature who lives outside human law entirely. When Odysseus lectures him about Zeus and the duties owed to guests, the Cyclops laughs and says the Cyclopes care nothing for Zeus. They are stronger than the gods. And then he does the monstrous thing and eats them. Both of them break xenia. The giant breaks it with cannibalism. The man breaks it with burglary and entitlement. Hohmer stages a collision between two beings who each, in their own way, refuse the sacred rule, and he does not flatten it into hero and villain. He lets it stay ugly on both sides. And then Odysseus does the thing that actually curses him, and it is not the blinding. They are away on the ship, safe, rowing hard, the blinded giant helpless on his shore. And Odysseus cannot resist. He stands up and shouts back across the water, telling Polyphemus his real name, not nobody, but Odysseus, son of Laertes of Ithaca, the man who put out your eye. Pure pride. He has to be known for it. And that is the mistake, because now the giant has a name to curse. Polyphemus lifts his hands to his father, because Polyphemus is a son of Poseidon, god of the sea, and he prays, "Let this man never reach home, or if he must, let him come late and broken, having lost all his companions, to find suffering in his house." And Poseidon hears his blinded son and grants it. Everything that happens to Odysseus after this, 10 more years, every drowned companion, every disaster at sea, flows from that one moment of a clever man who could not resist saying his own name. The trap called nobody was genius. Throwing it away to boast was not. Hohmer lets his hero doom himself with his own mouth. Now go back further than the Odyssey, to who this giant was before Hohmer's cave, because there is an entire other tradition about Polyphemus, and it is a love story. Centuries after Hohmer, the poet Theocritus wrote about a young Polyphemus before any of this, when he was simply a Cyclops in love. He had fallen for Galatea, a beautiful sea-nymph who lived off the coast of Sicily, and he was hopeless with it. Theocritus shows him sitting on the shore, singing to her across the water, painfully aware of everything wrong with him, the single eye, the shaggy size, the rough face, and offering her the only things he has: his flocks, his cheeses, his cave, a life. He is not a monster in these poems. He is a lonely giant who knows he is not beautiful and loves anyway, and the poem is half comic and half unbearably sad. Theocritus's whole point is that Polyphemus survives his heartbreak by turning it into song. The cure for love, he says, is music. The Roman poet Ovid took the same giant and the same nymph and gave it a darker ending. In Ovid, Galatea does not simply ignore Polyphemus. She loves someone else, a beautiful young mortal shepherd named Odysseus. And Polyphemus finds them together. And the lovesick giant, the one who sang so tenderly, is also enormous and grieving and enraged, and he tears a piece off the mountainside and crushes Odysseus dead beneath it. Galatea, unable to save her lover's life, turns his crushed body into a river so that at least some part of him would go on flowing through the island forever. It is jealousy and murder and grief all at once, and the monster at the center of it is the same creature Odysseus blinded, a being capable of love, and of the violence that comes when love is refused. Hold those two Polyphemuses next to each other, the cannibal in the cave and the giant weeping on the rock. The Greeks did not think they had to choose. The one who eats Odysseus's men and the one who sings to Galatea are the same monster, and the ancient world was comfortable letting him be both. A creature with an appetite and a heart, a threat and a victim, depending on who wandered onto his island and what they wanted from him. And that doubleness goes all the way down, because the Greeks could not even agree on what a Cyclops fundamentally was. Hohmer's Cyclopes are savages, lawless herdsmen with no cities, no assemblies, no ships, no farming, each living alone in his cave caring nothing for gods or neighbors. They are the image of life without civilization. But that is not the only Cyclops the Greeks knew. Go to Hesiod, writing around the same time as Hohmer, and the Cyclopes are something almost opposite. Master craftsmen, divine smiths, three brothers who forged the thunderbolt itself for Zeus. In Hesiod, the Cyclops is not the enemy of civilization. He is the one who arms the king of the gods. One tradition makes the one-eyed giant a brute below humanity. The other makes him a genius above it. Same creature, two completely different meanings, side by side in the same century. There may even be a physical reason the image took hold at all, though here we are firmly in the land of guesswork. On the islands of the Mediterranean, Sicily among them, there are fossil skulls of prehistoric dwarf elephants, animals that lived and died out there long before people arrived. And an elephant skull has a single enormous hole in the center of the face, where the trunk attached, a great central cavity that, to someone who had never seen a living elephant, looks unmistakably like the socket of one huge eye. In 1914, a paleontologist suggested that ancient people digging up these skulls imagined the giants they belonged to. One-eyed, monstrous, buried in the earth of the very islands where the Cyclopes were said to live. It is only a theory. But it is a haunting one, the idea that the Cyclops began as a real bone misread. The point of all of it is the same. There was never one Cyclops. There was a smith and a savage, a monster and a lovesick fool, maybe even a misread fossil, a shape the Greeks poured different meanings into depending on what the story needed him to be. And the version that won, the only one most people now remember, is the narrowest one, the obstacle in the cave. We kept the monster and forgot the rest. So was the Cyclops the real victim? Not simply and not innocently. Polyphemus eats human beings. Nothing in the love songs erases the two men whose heads he broke on the cave floor. If you are looking for a spotless victim, he is not it. But that was never the honest question. The honest question is whether the story is the clean hero versus monster tale we turned it into, and it is not. And Hohmer is the one who makes sure it is not. He is the one who has Odysseus break in and rob the place and linger out of greed. And he is the one who has Odysseus curse himself with his own boasting. The poem does not ask you to admire a hero escaping a beast. It hands you two creatures who both trample the sacred law, and it lets the man come off only a little better than the monster, and sometimes not even that. And then the later poets did something the Odyssey never bothered to. They gave the monster an inside. They sat him on a rock and let him sing, and love, and grieve, and kill for grief, and be as lonely as anyone who has ever wanted someone who did not want them back. They took the thing in the cave and made it a person, which is the opposite of what myth usually does, and it tells you the Greeks understood something we keep forgetting. That the monster in the story is almost always someone's whole life, seen for one afternoon by a stranger who wanted something from it. Odysseus sailed away and never thought about Polyphemus again. But Polyphemus, blinded, alone on his shore, lifted his hands to his father the sea, and the sea listened. That curse is the engine of everything that comes next. The 10 lost years, the drowned crew, the long ruin of the journey home. The most famous monster in the Odyssey does not just lose. He reaches up out of his defeat and bends the entire rest of the story around his grief. And where the sea took Odysseus after that, and what it cost him, is a tale for another night.